The world is constantly programming you to believe in limitations, but all things are possible with God. When you believe in your limitations, you get to experience a limited reality. When you believe all things are possible with God, you get to experience the unlimited. You get to choose. It's either a life of limitation through the seen realm only, or a life of co-laboring with God to bring His kingdom to earth through the unseen. Trust me, you want to go with God on this thing. The promises of God offered in the Bible cover just about every area of life you can imagine. It's truly staggering. Now, it's true that some of the promises are contingent on giving or some other type of obedience, but simply being a believer in Jesus Christ grants you access to, quote, everything you need for life and godliness. And that includes everything you need for life and godliness. God's provision, His peace, His protection. And it absolutely includes health and prosperity too. These are things that are offered as promises in the Bible. Long life, even conquest of death itself through Jesus Christ. Try to imagine if an insurance company were to offer you all of those things. What kind of premium would you be willing to pay? Here we have them as being offered for free. But there's only one problem. These promises are yours as potential or position, but they only become yours in experience when you rise up to possess them. It was the exact same thing for the Israelites. Remember, God had said, I have given you the land. But there was no milk and no honey for a single Israelite until 40 years had passed. Why? Because of unbelief. They couldn't believe the land was really theirs because they were way too focused on the seen. So they chickened out. But you and I do not have to make that mistake. We can decide, these promises are mine. Then we go up at once to take possession. How do we do that? By faith. As the word tells us in Romans 4:16, therefore the promise comes through faith. Now, you may realize that faith comes from hearing, but you need to also know that hearing has to be matched with belief. For example, if you decide to accept Jesus, the word says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Notice here that all the elements for salvation had to work together. It wasn't just hearing, it wasn't just confession, it included belief as well. It works the exact same way for everything else. For example, if you want healing, you have to hear and believe. Like it says in James, the prayer of faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. Fulfillment of the promise requires belief. It requires faith. And the thing that stands in the way is always the same, unbelief. And the Bible actually calls unbelief sin. It says, see to it that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. Let's use Abraham as an example. It says, consider Abraham. He believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. We read in Romans 4 that Abraham did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, being fully persuaded that God had power to do what he had promised. Now, if Abraham had been taking into account the seen realm, he would have been in big trouble. The word says his body was as good as dead because he was nearly 100 years old. The logical conclusion is, he's not having any kids. But it says, against all hope, Abraham in hope believed. He looked past the seen to God's promise, and that's where he put his faith. And we have to do the same. We have to get beyond the seen and have to stop wavering through unbelief. We have the freedom to choose our thoughts, and we are constantly using them, either positively or negatively. But we have to get clear about this one thing. We cannot plant a thought of one kind and expect it to bear fruit of another kind. That just doesn't work. So let's say I speak out a promise of God, but in the very next second, all these thoughts start rising up in my analytical mind. All these arguments against it, reasons why it can't be. Each doubt cancels the promise and produces negative results by the very same law by which the word of faith produces positive ones. And this is the thing that we have to reverse. This channel is dedicated to helping you do just that. God has taught me so much about the law of faith, and I can't wait to share what I've learned with you. So please stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for listening. But in the meantime, don't wait. I urge you to make a bold declaration today over your own life. All things are possible with God. That's for me. That starts right here and right now. Listen, you'll never regret putting all your chips in with God. In his own words, he says, "Those who hope in me will not be disappointed."